Welcome to episode 37 of the Luke Macias Show. We are going to take today to discuss, I think, what is the biggest story in Texas right now, and that is the case of Botham Jean and Amber Geiger. We're also going to discuss the outcome of that case. We're going to discuss the hope that has sprung from the courageous actions of one man in particular, that being Brant Jean, Botham's brother. I'm sure many of you, our listeners, have seen the video. If you haven't, you can go to our Facebook page. You can go really anywhere. Just Google Brant Jean, and you'll see the courageous words of a 19-year-old young man who forgave Amber Geiger, a police officer who killed his innocent brother. And we're also going to talk about some unfortunate reactions to these courageous actions of Brant. So, guys, just to catch you up very quickly, and then we're going to go to Brant's words himself. Amber Geiger was a police officer who in Dallas walked in on her neighbor's apartment. She claims to have thought that apartment was her own. He was an innocent young man who had somebody invade his own property, pull a gun on him. He was eating ice cream, and she shot him. She ended his life. And so this caused a lot of controversy. And I remember when it happened, and I know many of my fellow Texans know when it happened and the reporting that was done on it and the concerns that people had over this being a policeman and this being a man of color and all of the racial tensions that arise from these incidents. And so the court case was going on this last week, and the jury of Amber's peers decided that she was indeed a murderer, and they said that she was a murderer. And this came to the surprise of many, some who were in the minority community who thought that this would not happen and felt that it was more just that she be called that. In fact, there were other people like Mark Davis, a prominent conservative voice in the DFW area, who was on the side of saying that he thought that she should not be labeled a murderer, but this should be given a manslaughter charge due to the fact that this was not her intention, but it was a mistake, and she did kill an innocent life in the process. This episode is not about that, and we're not going to discuss the differences. And the reason we're not going to discuss the different opinions one way or the other is that Brant Jean changed the discussion. I want to follow up. So after she was given the sentence of murder, the jury also decided to give her 10 years, which for some people seemed light and for some people seemed fair. So in the midst of these different disagreements on a very controversial case, in a very controversial situation, in walks Brant Jean to the narrative. And for those listening or watching this, we're just going to play this video real quick, and I'll put it up for the Facebook and YouTube video. And if you're listening, you'll hear this audio so you can understand what Brant's words were. Okay, so we're going to bear with me.
If you truly are sorry,
while I get this
I know
going.
I can speak for myself. I forgive you. And I know if you go to God and ask Him, He will forgive you. And I don't think anyone could say it. Again, I'm speaking for myself, not even bad for my family. But I love you just like anyone else. And I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die just like my brother did, but I personally want the best for you. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you. Because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do. And the best would be give your life to Christ. I'm not gonna say anything else. I think giving your life to Christ would be best thing that both of them would want you to do. Again, I love you as a person, and I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes.
I'm sure many of you have asked yourself the same question since watching Brant's comments, and that would be, would I have the same strength and willingness to forgive somebody who took the life of my innocent family member? And I hope and pray that if I ever find myself in such a situation, that the Lord would give me the grace sufficient to do so. Brant's comments have, for the large part, dominated the media coverage, which I really appreciate. He took an issue that could have been a dividing issue in our nation, and he found and gave us a way to unite around the idea of forgiveness. It's something we all know is necessary in the world. This isn't a right or a left thing. It's not a Democrat or a Republican thing. There are going to be people on all sides of the political spectrum. There will be people of all colors and creeds who see and saw this as the message of mercy that was needed. Does that mean that Amber didn't do anything wrong? Absolutely not. You know, people often get mad at the justice system. They get mad at the way one group of people are treated over another. But what Brant did was he decided that in his own way, for himself, he was going to forgive. And if there's one person in this particular situation who has the right to not forgive, it would be Brant. And I think for most people, they had to take a step back, and before engaging on the political rhetoric, had to acknowledge just what this really was about. I'm grateful for Brant for doing that. You know, Republicans love to point to President Barack Obama and the fact that even after he got elected, even after a black man got elected, racial tensions rose during his presidency. And they want to blame him for that. And then, of course, Democrats say, well, we're going to blame the people that didn't like having a black president. They're the reason that we had racial tensions. And then Democrats like pointing to Trump and saying that the election of him as president has led to the racial tensions that currently exist. And the truth is, I, as a conservative Republican, believe that even if a Democrat were to have been elected, even if Hillary Clinton were to have been elected, there would still remain significant racial tensions and wounds that exist within our nation. But here is something I hope we can unite around, which is the idea that Brant Jean did more to heal the racial tensions in our nation than any president ever has, maybe ever will do. watching people's reactions has been a uniting thing. In fact, Joe Moody, a state representative from El Paso, I'm going to read his tweet on this issue because it's something that I wholeheartedly agree with. But he said, "There is nothing easy about dealing with violence. However, this act of love and mercy should inspire all of us to always strive to be better people, always lead with love." And that is from a Democrat state representative from El Paso, somebody who I do not agree with on many issues. I definitely do not fall in line with him regarding many social or fiscal policies that affect our state. And this is where I want to get to my biggest frustration within this story, which was by the Texas Tribune and Washington Post. And this is not an indictment on every single person who works at either one of those institutions, but I am very displeased, upset, and saddened by the reporting that they decided to do in one particular piece that they posted on Thursday. And I'm going to read y'all the headline. They said Amber Geiger was hugged by her victim's brother and a judge, igniting a debate about forgiveness and race. Some were confused, troubled, and outraged after Amber Geiger received embraces from both the victim's brother and the judge. This is really, really, really unfortunate and honestly should anger most Texans. The act of a young man communicating forgiveness was turned by the Washington Post and the Texas Tribune into another piece written to further divide our society and our culture. It's pretty outrageous. They went on to talk about 18-year-old Brant. I guess I said 19 earlier, but in their story they say 18, so I'll take their word for it. They quote Ted Cruz and Nikki Haley. They even quote the district attorney, I believe, somewhere in here, who said it was a demonstration of Christian love. Ted Cruz saying, Christian love, amazing act of healing is what Ted Cruz called it. They even quoted Nikki Haley saying this was an amazing example of faith, love, and forgiveness. They don't identify the district attorney as a Democrat, which would probably be more appropriate at this particular time since they've used two very prominent Republican figures. And then they go on to quote several people who are upset with this. Now, I want to stop before I get into this. I have a tremendous amount of liberal, left-leaning friends and family who have all, I think, agreed with the general assessment that this story and Brant's forgiveness is something to be commended, something to be praised. It doesn't surprise me that if you go hunting, you can find a handful of people that somehow are going to take issue with his words. It troubles me that the Tribune and the Washington Post decided to go try to hunt those people down to make them the other side of this story. That is very, very troubling and will only stoke additional tensions and division. Even through Brant's courage, they are going to try to insist on drawing attention to a handful of people that find this act of forgiveness divisive. So they quote Jamar Tisby, "Black people, when they experience injustice, there's almost an expectation that we will immediately forgive and therefore can sort of move on. So I think a lot of people are reacting that we have a right to be angry, a right to grieve, and a right to want justice." Now, I know that I don't have Jamar here, and this is just one quote, right? So there's other things that he probably would have said, but I'm going to take issue with something he said here and something that the Washington Post and Tribune decided to draw attention to, which is saying that there's an expectation that black people will immediately forgive. Well, let me just let Mr. Tisby know that the reason that Brandt's video has been seen by hundreds of millions of people is because no one expected it. No one expected it. This was not something that our nation just expects you to show up with and deliver. I wish we had an expectation of forgiveness through all of society. When you look at the comments on this video, man, we need more of this in America. People are saying that of themselves. I need more forgiveness. Brandt's actions were not expected. They were no more expected by me or anyone else, and they weren't expected by Jemar Tisby. I absolutely do not believe that he watched Brandt's actions and said, oh, that's just expected. There are a number of other people that they decided to quote. They quoted a New York Times article titled "Why I Can't Forgive Dylan Roof." Again, going back to another case in 2015 to try to make sure people know not everyone agrees with this idea of forgiveness. They quote this very hurt, clearly bitter writer who says white people embrace narratives about forgiveness so they can pretend the world is a fairer place than it actually is, and that racism is merely a vestige of a painful past instead of this indelible part of our present. What does that have to do with Brandt's hug and offer of forgiveness in 2019? I don't know, but evidently it's the other narrative that must be pushed by a media that is determined to stoke the division that exists within our state. It's absolutely absurd. And the more you read this article, the more you will be saddened. Now, I want to make sure it's clear. I think there is such a small group of Texans that would even read this and find some agreement with it. I think the vast majority of people on the right and the left can unite behind Brandt's actions. It is very unfortunate. It is shameful that the Texas Tribune and the Washington Post decided to print this story immediately following one of the probably the most viewed video in the last week, which was Brandt Jean's offer of forgiveness to Amber Geiger. In an increasingly secular culture, we are going to have a harder and harder time as a nation understanding forgiveness. There's a reason that Brandt's offer came with a recommendation that Amber consider accepting Christ. After all, Christ is the one who gave this example when he was on the cross and people were sneering at him, religious and secular, when people were dividing up his goods and casting lots to get them, gambling for his possessions, when people were making fun of him, when they were challenging him, he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." What about that ask for forgiveness is remarkable? It's that no one was even asking to be forgiven. You know, I have an easier time forgiving someone if they'll just ask me. That's what I do with my wife more often than not, right? If I feel like she's wronged me in some way, I mean, I can forgive her. But man, I want her to ask. I want her to tell me she did something wrong. You can't watch Brandt's words and not be convicted to your core. Colossians 3:13 says, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." And that is undoubtedly the message that Brandt was giving to Amber, both in his words and his embrace. The embrace is key. It pricked the hearts of a nation. And yet a couple writers at the Washington Post quote a New York Times columnist and get published in the Texas Tribune saying, wait, let's talk about why some people have a legitimate gripe with this situation, why some people don't think we should forgive. There is no room for progress, healing within our society for that kind of narrative. You know, in Corinthians, it ends with the idea, faith, hope, and love. These things remain, but the greatest of these is love. It's a message that Brant decided to deliver to Texas. It's a message that went across the nation. My goal would be for you to take away that we are blessed in Texans to have such courageous and strong citizens as Brant Jean. We clearly have some in our culture that are even involved in some of the larger institutions like the Texas Tribune, Washington Post, and New York Times, who even in that situation seek to further divide us. Don't let them do it. Please don't let them do it. And please don't think that I'm telling you that every single wrong has been righted. But understand that the point of forgiving, an unconditional forgiveness, is something we all need more of. And I do want to also leave you with Brant's message that if you really do want the peace that surpasses all understanding, it will only be found at the cross of Christ. I'm sure many of you who are subscribers to this podcast don't come here on a weekly basis to receive a sermon. But Brant Jean has inserted that into our culture and society just for a week. And for that, I'm very grateful. God bless you.